Good evening. Let's call to order the regular council meeting of December 5th, and we actually have an amended agenda. We've added 3.1, Accessibility Advisory Committee recognition. So I'd look to staff. First of all, are there any other additions? Thank you. So a motion to adopt the amended agenda as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. So we're going to move to 3.1. So in November of this year was the last meeting of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. This committee was set up in the fall of 2007 in response to a requirement for grant funding received at the time. So we want to thank all those who provided their expertise to this committee, council, and the community over the years. Your efforts have raised the profile of accessibility issues in the minds of developers, our staff, and council. Going forward, as positions on the Advisory Planning Commission open up, we hope that we can add your expertise to that board, and we invite members of this committee to apply. We have 4 positions actually opening up beginning of January. So I'd like to acknowledge the following current members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee and invite those in attendance to come forward. Christy Totten, Elise Rudland, Barry Pruden, Bill Conway, Denise Clark Ames, Lynn Forrest, and Jennifer Mason. So please come forward. Thank you. So we're going to move on to item 3.2. Jeff Craig, President of the Sunshine Coast Community Forest, is going to present the third quarter report. And please turn on your microphone. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Craig, Chair and President of the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. One thing I'd like to make clear for new councillors is that the results we're talking about here are those of Seashell Community Projects Incorporated, which is the legal entity that does business as the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. I know that sometimes can be confusing, even to me sometimes. So, we've had a very good year this year so far. As mentioned in my report, record revenues of $3,647,000. And a net income so far of $1,278,000 that will go down a bit because we have no logging over the rest of the year. And again, as I mentioned, these results are not going to be as good in the next 2 years because we have a smaller cut and possibly lower log prices. I mentioned in my report about an urban interface fire workshop that we're planning. And it looks like that's not going to happen before the end of the year. Our operations manager, Dave Lasser, has been trying to round up these 4 experts from around the province who will come here, and hopefully it will happen in January or February. But the idea is to have these guys here, show them the area, meet with the public, and you will all be invited to a meeting and talk about what can be done to reduce the risk of fires, especially where they might affect residences. I also want to mention that we would like to offer an orientation workshop for councillors new and old, and we've been working on a presentation and look forward to giving it to you when it's convenient for council in the new year, presumably.
Okay.
And also, I just wanted to mention our legacy committee recently met and reviewed numerous applications, and we will be sending our recommendations to council for your approval shortly. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions of council? I have one question.
Sure.
It's on your financial statement. You have, under strategic initiatives, you talk about research. And you budgeted 15,000 and spent 30. So I'm just wondering what you were researching.
Honestly, I'm not sure on that one. We do. We have some watershed studies ongoing. I'm not sure if that's in that category.
Okay.
And I know that we've helped with the Roberts Creek Study Forest, which is partially in our area, and the funding for that has sort of dried up on the provincial level, and we've assisted in some of the research so as not to lose the the good work that's happened in the past.
Okay. Any other questions by council? Councillor Lamb.
I just once again in your financial here, your legal and audit, you've got a budget of 124,000 and you've spent 91,000. I'm just wondering, is that with regards to court challenges and I guess is that money spent with
yes,
court challenges and
yes, that
and off, like hiring a consultant or somebody that to make sure that you're doing the work appropriately?
That's in most of that. Of course, it's legal and audit, but the majority of that would be the court injunction and our response to it. That court injunction that happened during the year, and the injunction ultimately failed, and we were awarded costs, and so that's something that may happen, but as you may know, court awarded costs are nothing near what you actually pay. You'd be lucky if it's 20%. Yeah.
So in reality, a good portion of this could come back. These are legal challenges. I mean, if you didn't have these legal challenges, that money would stay in our community.
Absolutely.
And would be here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we do have the letter that you sent with regards to the orientation. That's part of our correspondence, so we'll deal with that when that comes there.
Okay.
The Urban Interface Workshop, we look forward to dates on that, and I believe that's something, given it's our organization, we can assist in getting the information out.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. So we have no proclamations. So adoption of minutes of previous council meetings, minutes of the 7 p.m. regular council meeting of November 21st. A motion to receive and adopt. Moved, seconded. Any errors or omissions or amendments in those minutes? Okay, all those in favor? Thank you. Then we're looking at the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes for the meeting of November 28th. Motion to adopt. Moved and seconded. Any errors on that? Okay, all those in favor? Thank you very much. So we move to bylaws. First one is the proposed amendment bylaw for the subdivision and development control servicing standards bylaw number 430-5, 2018. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you. Moved to seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And we'll turn over to Ms. Corbett.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. The reason for this amendment is because under Bylaw 430, there's a very specific limitation on the extensions to subdivisions. And what we're finding with a few of them, this is certainly not an across-the-board issue with a few of them, when they've got either complex servicing agreements that need to be done, they're large-scale subdivisions, or in some cases, we're waiting for ministry approval on certain things. It means that the applicant runs out of time. And under the bylaw, they're only allowed one extension for 6 months. And if they are unable to complete the requirements of the preliminary layout approval in that time, they have to reapply. And that is an extremely high cost. It's $1,500 for the application, and it's $500 a lot. So when you look at something like some of our larger subdivisions, such as the one in Davis Bay, that's close to $35,000 on the applicant. So we wanted to do an amendment to the bylaw that would allow the approving officer and the director of engineering and operations to have some ability to consider those that are kind of significant. We don't want to kind of open it up to everyone to just delay their requirements, but under those that meet certain criteria, that they'd be enabled to extend the extension time. So the bylaw is proposing a change to that section in there. So that is the intent of it. Yeah, open to any questions. Thank you.
Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to the intent of the original bylaw. What is the purpose of a deadline on these applications?
Staff.
Through the chair, the reason for it is that sometimes they can just go dormant, and in a longer time frame, our standards may change, our bylaws may change, so we want to keep some timeline on it so that they're not kind of being grandfathered on things that have changed. So that's the rationale for a timeline.
Any other questions? Councillor Toth.
I see in your amendment that there would be no longer any fees associated with renewals or extensions. Do we know what the financial implication or impact is on that?
Through the chair, what we discovered in looking at that is that it actually conflicts with our fees and charges bylaw. We already have fees associated with certain extensions written in there. And under the fees and charges bylaw, there aren't requirements for a simple extension. So this actually set up a conflict with it. So what we've proposed in the amendment is to remove that sentence.
Any other questions? I have a question. I had a member of the public come forward and indicate that there potentially are other situations that could be included beyond the developer's control that we could consider including. Those would be things where we would go to external agencies who could perhaps delay things, archaeological requirements, etc. And I brought these to you earlier, so I believe you have a revised amendment that we could put in here, a revised piece in the bylaw, right? Do you want to read that?
I do.
Yes.
So what is suggested there, so the reasoning behind that is we just had the one passage where if infrastructure servicing is complex, and there was a need to kind of refine that a little bit more under what circumstances that might be, because it might extend beyond just the servicing. We do have other situations where we're reliant on ministries and that sort of thing. So the proposed amendment to the amendment is to delete Section 3 in its entirety and then replace it with a new one that says essentially the same thing as at the very top. It's valid for the 18 calendar months, and the approving officer with the Director of Engineering may consider extensions to this date if, in the opinion of the approving officer, at no time has the progression of the application lapsed. Secondly, and this is a reordering, the owner makes a written request to the Director of Engineering and Operations prior to the preliminary layout approval expiry, and then subsection 3, in the opinion of the Director of Engineering, the requirements for completing the conditions of the preliminary layout approval entail additional processes which may include, but not be limited to, A, complex off-site servicing requirements, B, additional planning approvals. So that's where we may have a very complex geotechnical requirement on our subdivision, and sometimes that takes much longer. Or they find when they've done their subdivision, sometimes it kicks into the need for a variance, and that means there's another planning process involved in it. And C, additional reviews or approvals from external agencies or government ministries.
Okay. Any questions about this proposed amendment? Councillor McLean.
Is it possible to see the text on that? I lost track of the amendments.
Do you happen to have a copy? Okay, so while he's reviewing that, second recommendation on here is that we give first, second, and third readings to the proposed District of Sechelt Subdivision and Development Control Servicing Standards Bylaw number 430-5. Staff?
Your Worship, it would actually be appropriate to have the amendment first moved and seconded, that the bylaw be amended per what Director Corbett has read out, and then we can proceed with reading it, because then it will include the amendment.
Okay. What I'd like to do is see if council wants to move forward with first, second, and third, and then we would do the amendment.
Sure.
You can guide me through that?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. What's council's pleasure? Would you like to move this forward tonight? Okay, I'd like a motion to move and second that we give it first, second, and third reading then. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. So then, bylaw number 430-5, 2008, as amended? Or do we want to move, how do we?
You actually should be moved, seconded, and then the motion in the minutes will be that the bylaw be amended per, and we'll actually spell out the exact change, the amended wording in the motion.
Thank you for having the copy.
Yes, and then carry that, and then you can go ahead and give the bylaw the 3 readings, and it will be presumed that those amendments are already in there.
So you want us to pass this?
The amendment.
The amendment. Okay,
yes.
So this amendment. The amended amendment, okay. So a preliminary layout approval is valid for 18 calendar months. The approving officer, with agreement of the Director of Engineering and Operations, may consider extensions to this date if, number 1, in the opinion of the approving officer, at no time has the progression of the application lapsed. Number 2, the owner makes a written request to the Director of Engineering and Operations prior to the preliminary layout approval expiry. And 3, in the opinion of the Director of Engineering, the requirements for completing the conditions of the preliminary layout approval entail additional processes, which may include, but not be limited to, A, complex off-site servicing requirements, B, additional planning approvals, and C, additional reviews or approvals from external agencies or government ministries. So would someone like to move that? Thank you. Councillor McLean, Councillor Toth, all in favor? Thank you very much. So now we can go to bylaw and the bylaw and give it first, second, and third reading? Okay. So bylaw number 430-5, and this is whereas the District of Sechelt adopted subdivision and development control servicing standards bylaw number 430-2003 to guide development, ensuring that subdivisions and developments are appropriately serviced and developed within a period of time. We are looking to do an amendment as presented. We are deleting paragraph 3 as it's laid out and replacing it with the one that we've just read. Would someone like to move first reading? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Second reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And third reading. Moved and seconded. Okay. All in favor? Thank you very much. Would you like this back? Okay. You can fight over it. Okay. So let's move to smoking control bylaw number 570, 2018 on page 30, item 8.2A. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And did staff want to speak to this? This is for adoption.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, this is for adoption. So there's two bylaws in front of you and they're related. So the smoking control bylaw number 570, 2018, it was given second and third on November 21st. It was reviewed and approved by the medical officer of health. That was the one outstanding issue before approval. That was given on November 26, 2018. So it's recommended for adoption for that bylaw, as well as bylaw number 515-4, 2018, which is the bylaw notice enforcement implementation bylaw, which gives effect for enforcement and the levying of fines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move forward, does council have any questions? All right. So I would look for a motion to adopt District of Sechelt bylaw number 570, 2018, a bylaw to regulate smoking within the District of Sechelt. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. We'll move to item 8.3A. This is a bylaw notice enforcement implementation bylaw amendment number 515-4, 2018. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? And I think for this one, we will go right to adoption of this. This follows the previous bylaw. So this is a motion to adopt bylaw number 515-4, 2018, a bylaw to amend the bylaw notice enforcement implementation bylaw number 515, 2012. Motion to adopt, seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. So we come to 10.1, which Julie's patiently been waiting for. This is on page 44. First, a motion to receive. This is on municipal reclassification, district to city. Motion to receive. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And Julie, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Your Worship, Council. This is essentially a little housekeeping item for your consideration. A lot of municipalities that are considered district, and really it's unfortunate that we went from a village to a district. I wish they'd just skipped a step up and gone to a town or something else. A lot of communities that are districts find that there is confusion between the community that is district and the regional district. It causes confusion at tax time. It causes confusion among who does what in terms of responsibility. You may have received a lot of complaints about water, which is a regional district responsibility. So it helps to alleviate some of that confusion to not be called a district. And then there's also sometimes there's a perception when you're trying to attract investment. If you're a district, for people who don't live in rural areas, and most of our investors will come from bigger cities, there's a perception that a district is some kind of farming community somewhere, and it's entirely up to you how you want to be perceived. A city designation or classification is sometimes just considered something that's a bit more of a hub, and I believe that the city of Sechelt could still have the downtown village, seaside village feel. We can still enhance our downtown. We can still continue with that local seaside village branding of our downtown, but for the purposes of economic development, we could be called a city. But that is entirely up to you which way you want to go. And I recommended the AAP process as opposed to a full referendum. The legislation just requires that you ask the community through one of those legal processes, and AAP is a lot cheaper.
Thank you. And council, any questions? Any discussion? Councillor?
Julie, was there any thought to bringing this to sort of a have your say forum? Because there seems to be a little bit of comment out there about the idea, so I'm just curious.
Absolutely, if that's something that council would like to do. So, I mean, essentially, this is just gauging your interest. If you are interested in it and you'd like to talk to the community a little bit more, we could certainly set up an online survey and a discussion forum online. We could have a community meeting, or we can just jump straight ahead to the AAP process, which is kind of the same thing, only it's more legal. You would still have to do the AAP, even if you did a have your say.
Right, I think just sort of more engagement would give more time for conversation than an AAP, though. For me, that's what feels good. I know it might just be a formality or housekeeping, but people are very tied into how this community, how they see it and how they believe it's viewed, and there'll be varying opinions. So my pleasure would be to have some more community involvement around it.
Councillor Toth?
Thank you. I appreciate your enthusiasm with this idea. Personally, I see it solving a problem that I don't think exists. It doesn't give us access to any more grant money. It doesn't change anything except the way we're perceived. When people go to Vancouver, you don't say you're going to Vancouver. You say you're going to the city. And it's usually done in a derogatory tone. And I would be okay with moving forward with this after hearing from the community, but I'm not in favor of moving forward with it at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Tom's itching.
You know, Julie, I just love your enthusiasm. You know, the few days that I've had a chance to meet you, it's been awesome to see somebody with some get up and go. And but one of the things that we talked about was small village appeal and the friendly soul pace. And you know, I believe we have to go out to the public with this because it has, you know, you've brought it forward, and it would be good to get some feedback so you get some, you know, so you understand the community a bit more. So, but I support you, yeah, as you move forward. Thanks.
Councillor McLean.
Okay, so I'll echo some of the comments that have been said so far, but frankly, I see this as a distraction. A name is not the primary thing holding us back. It's also not the thing that will save Sechelt. I think there's a lot of other things that we can do for economic development. And one thing that I see work being done is the branding strategy. I think that could really move us forward in promoting Sechelt with a larger image, a brand, and what people perceive Sechelt is. It's not that one word district versus city. So I'm not in favor of moving forward with this. I'm not in favor of consultation. I think it's a distraction. Let's focus on the branding strategy. Let's focus on real economic development. And let's not deceive people in the public and outside of our community by calling us a city when really I don't think we are.
Okay, anybody else? Weigh in, go ahead. I'll weigh in at the end.
I think I agree that we need to go out into the community. Just talking to the citizens already and reading posts, I really think it's something that we need to go out to them and get their opinion. And so at this time, I think that's what we need to do before we move forward with it. So.
Okay. I'm going to throw another wrinkle in. During the election campaign, I had a lot of people come up to me and indicate that they did want the name changed, but they didn't want city. They wanted town because they felt a city was too big, that we weren't a city, and we didn't want to represent ourselves as a city. But they agreed with what you came forward with about district, in that the district felt kind of too, like not, it's big and it doesn't really have boundaries in most people's minds. But they like the idea of town. So I would like to take it out to the community, but I'd like to have options. Do we keep the same? Do we go with town? Do we go with city? And I don't know how we move a motion like that and what you'd like to do for consultation. Yes.
If this was going to be a no-brainer for council, then
Yeah.
okay, then it city, and then we kick off next year as we start working on the branding. Because how are we branding ourselves? Are we branding ourselves as the district of Seashelt, just Seashelt, or city of? So to me, it's part of your brand. You can't start your branding if you don't know who you are. So what I'm hearing though is let's talk to the community a little bit more. Can I work this into part of our branding discussions when I start working with the community and having, you know, the open houses and the world cafes and the surveys on, you know, how do you see Seashelt and what do you envision and what do you love? Sort of a continuation of the graffiti project is start asking a little bit more about, are we a town? Are we a city? I would also back up a little bit and check with the provincial government and find out if we can be a town. I don't want to ask them if they would like to be a town, if that's not even a possibility. But if I could wait until next year when we begin the branding project and work this in as part of that and take that as direction from council, can I do that? Or do they need a motion?
Go ahead, Councillor Scott.
I agree with what Darnell has said, and it's probably unfortunate. I think we're going to find that we're not going to be allowed to be called a town. We just bypass that. I'm not a fan of district at all. It's too Hunger Games for me. But I think district might be negative in our brand, so I think maybe going forward, if we're not going to move to a city, which I think is a bit premature myself, maybe we just drop the whole district in our brand and we're Seashelt, would be my thoughts.
So that's another option. So do you need a motion to be able to explore this possibility with the community? Corporate officer likes a motion. Okay. Okay.
You could do a motion that directs staff to pursue the naming of district, town, city as part of the branding project in 2019.
Okay.
Go from there.
Would anybody like to make that motion? Okay, moved, seconded. Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? And would you like that recorded? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, he does. Thank you. All right. So we're going to move to item 10.2 on page 47. This is with regards to West Porpoise Bay Estates Limited, Lot 1, District Lot 304, Plan EPP 70047, Revised Development Permit Application. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn this over to Ms. Corbett.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. The application in front of you is for a development permit. It's a revised application. It was in front of council previously. I'll go through a little bit on kind of what you can look at through a DP. One of the things that was interesting with this particular application, it came in with a development variance permit requirement for an increase in height, and most of the discussion through committee and through council has been related to the variance permit. We haven't had a lot of discussion on a lot of the details under the particular guidelines. So right now this is they've changed the development so that it no longer requires the height variance. So I'll walk you through kind of what we look at in a permit. So this is a multi-unit residential development. There are 6 buildings on the site. I did print off a larger version of both the site plan and some of the elevations. They are hard to see on an iPad. There's 80 residential units in total. So 2 of the buildings have 16 units. That's building 5 and 6. And 4 of them are 3-story residential underground parking, and those are 12 units. So in council considerations with a development permit, it's very different from a zoning application. And the amount of your discretion in the decision-making changes. And this is why when we bring a zoning application forward, it's really important to get it right. Because it's very hard as we move through the process, the ability to make changes and to really alter the development gets a little more prescribed. So this one is zoned for R4, which allows multi-unit development. And the zoning regulates the permitted uses, the height, the density. In a development permit area, your authority is with the guidelines, which is why I included in the package all the detailed guidelines, because that's what you can actually say yes or no to. There are 4 of them that apply to this development: the foreshore and the shoreline protection, the steep slopes, and that is the main interest in this particular development, and form and character considerations. So this is the application chronology that was in the report. So as I mentioned, it went through a number of presentations and considerations on the variance permit. And with a development variance permit, there's a statutory notification, which is why there was a lot of interest in this. So the development variance came in front of council twice. It got slightly modified the second time. Both were refused. So at the last council, when it was refused, the development permit was essentially deferred because they had to change it. The requests were to change height and density and to respond better to the DPA guidelines, particularly as they relate to the steep slopes number 5. The applicant has come forward with a proposed change, and what it changes primarily is the height. They did not reduce density, and it will be up to council to determine if their alignment with the DPA guidelines is sufficient. They meet some, they do not meet a number of them. So the current zoning is R4. This is the essentially the site layout. You can see it's essentially a second part of a strata. So there are existing buildings on site, and then this has been a redevelopment. The strata foreclosed, they split it off through a legal process, and now this is coming forward as a change to the strata plan. So this was the original strata plan. It was 16 phases. Only 3 of them got built. It was proposing the number of units there refers to the area that this application is applying to, just to give some comparisons. The full development was higher than that. So 16 phases, 47 units on the area below the existing strata road. It had a step design. There were much smaller buildings, 3-story. as I mentioned, it did go into foreclosure and then it was sold. And so the new applicant revised the strata plan to allow for higher density development and a very different form of development. A Form P refers to a phased strata plan, and what it does is it sets out the number of units, the phases, and the timing for those. The reason that becomes important, it's more important to the strata and the buyers of a development, particularly on those where sometimes in a phase strata that involves a lot of resort and recreational, sometimes they'll put those amenities at the last phase. And so the reason behind this kind of thing is to make sure that it actually gets done. So that's the rationale. It's not related to the zoning, it's not related to the development permit. So under the development permit area guidelines, guideline 3 covers marine, foreshore, and shoreline. And so the intent of that is really just to protect it from the impacts of development. This particular development meets that requirement. They've had a set in place the 15-meter protected area, and they're not proposing any structures on that foreshore. So there's no developed access, there's no docks, there's nothing that's really impacting on the foreshore. On DPA number 4, that covers, in this particular area, it covers rocky beachfront. It also applies to certain areas throughout the district, particularly in Sandy Hook and Twanak on rockfall and upland slope, but in this particular area, it applies to the beachfront. It's designed to protect from erosion, storm wave erosion, and development along the shorelines. And again, it met the requirement for this through the setback. So that entire area within the 15 meters, they're not touching the vegetation, it stays in place. On steep slopes, so this is the one that is most challenging on this particular site. It is a very steep site. In that particular picture, I'm actually standing right at the 15-meter line where the vegetation is and looking up to the existing development on the far east of that development site. So you can see how steep that particular part is. That's essentially the area where buildings 5 and 6 are being located. Under particular policies, we state that in the development permit area that we can consider development on the slopes, but it needs to be sensitively integrated into the terrain. We need to ensure that there are no hazards or hazards to either the land or to persons affected. The one that gets particularly tricky on this one is that development density calculations are usually based on areas excluding the land area of 30%. This isn't always possible to apply strictly through the district. There are a number of sites, particularly single detached sites that we look at where it would essentially sterilize all of the land, and they tend to build into the slope. But the intention is that we want to encourage development that works with the natural slope contours and reduce the amount of site alteration, the extent of the cuts and fills to keep the integrity of the slope. It also contains some guidelines related to the housing form, that it not be large monolithic. That becomes more concerning when you're dealing with an upward slope. It's much more visible when they're cutting into the top of that slope and it's a large building that is elevated above the neighborhoods. This isn't as applicable in this particular area because the density is on the down slope to a large degree. So this gives you another sense of the sloping. So if you've ever been on the site or looked at it, there is an existing concrete area. That's where the parking for buildings 5 and 6 will come in. That area is it's not exactly flat, but it's of a less slope. But as you go further down toward buildings 7, 8, and 9, the slope definitely falls off in that area. I did circulate the geotechnical report, and in there you can see that it actually extends between 10% slope and 60% slope. Again, that's, I'm just kind of hiking through the area, moving toward Buildings 10. I trespass on my time off. This is right below on the eastern edge, looking up to where the parking area will come in, the parking structures. In form and character development permit guidelines, what we look at there is really around making sure that when you're developing in multi-use, that you look at the massing, the design, the building materials, the relationship to the adjacent area. It doesn't mean that it has to conform strictly or that it's consistent in design. It means that the massing needs to be compatible, that you're not getting these glaring differences that don't fit with the area. So those are the kind of things we look at, as well as how they're dealing with lighting, outdoor spaces. In some cases, depending on the context, safety and security become a bigger issue, particularly in larger scale apartments and the underground parking and the safety of people going into those areas. This is the existing strata development, so it's fairly low rise. At one side, it tapers down. It's wood construction and darker materials. The picture on the other side is the access road in to it, and that's where the parking entrances will be. That is on the far side. This is right across from where Building 10 will be, and where that fencing is where Building 10 would be located. So it's very close to Marine Way. This is just walking down the Strata Road. This would be approximately across from where Buildings 7 and 8 would be. And it gives you a sense of the height where the balconies are in regard to the existing strata. So this is the application in front of you in terms of what this will look like. This is a rendering in terms of where those buildings will sit on the site. You can see in that there isn't anything that's coming into that shoreline. That stays with the vegetation. That marina is not attached to this development. This gives you a sense. I thought it'd be good to put this one in first before I go through the elevations, because the parking structure in here is really challenging to figure out on those site elevations. So this gives you a sense of where it comes in off the site, what it looks like. So it's utilizing that existing concrete structure to bring in a covered parking on the top, and there's parking down below for that's accessing into building number 5, and then it comes in. There's a driveway where you can see that covered parking with the vehicles underneath it. That is then the access into buildings 6, 7, and 8. They're all green roofed buildings. This gives you another, this is a different dimension on it, where you can see the access into both buildings. And this is what it would look like from essentially the position of the existing strata development. So I'll go through the renderings that kind of go from buildings 5, 6 across toward Marine Way. So this is building 6. Building 6 and building 5 weren't really subject or weren't of concern in looking at the development variance because they're quite low on the site and not of concern as much from a height perspective to the existing strata. The other ones certainly were. This is building 7. It's been lowered significantly from what it was in the previous development application. In the development variance, the building in 7, 8, and 9, they were up on stilts. So they were actually read as 2-story from the Strata Road. They've altered that, so they've lowered some of the buildings. Building 10 doesn't change that much. This is building 7. Sorry, get back. Building 8 essentially goes down the hill. Building 9 is up. That's reading as about 1.5 stories from the road. And building 10 is reading at 2-story from the road. So the elevation along it kind of does that through the site. So the elevations differ along the route. So it aligns with the topography. It doesn't give a consistent site from the Strata Road. The roof elevations will be very different. So these are the elevations in the drawings. This is the south elevation, and it's the south elevation that faces the existing strata. This is similar drawing for buildings 7 to 10. So these are the ones that have 12 units in them. This is how it essentially sits on the site. So you can see the amount of excavation that is now required. Previously, what they had was on that lower level, up on the stilts, it wasn't into the rock as much. So that's why it kicked into a height variance, because that underground parking wasn't really underground, so it counted toward their height. If it was on grade, usually when you do one level of underground and the 3 stories, that falls within the 10.5 meter height. So initially this didn't work. Now what they've done is they've lowered the buildings into the slope, and that's brought it down within the 10.5. So this is the section for building 7. This is what the north elevation looks like. So this is a side facing the inlet. So the building essentially terraces. It is, so it read as a 3-story down the slope with the underground parking essentially reading as a story at the end, but it's at the inlet side. It's not as visible. This is the west elevation, so that brown area, that's where the parking drive-through is. So they're accessing into building 7, and if you are accessing into 8, you drive through 7. That is elevation on the east side. So this is in buildings 5 and 6, and so that structure on the top there, that's the existing strata building. Then it goes into that covered parking, and then the building 5 is sunk down quite. That's where it sits quite low on the site, so it's downslope. This is in building 8. So this is the one that is the sunk the lowest from the road. There was certainly concern in terms of the visuals from the adjacent balconies. This is now quite a bit lower for that particular building. And for 7, it doesn't impede the views as much as it did. This is building 9, and the picture is showing essentially where it is relative to the existing strata. So the building 9 would be right across from that area. Building 10, that is the closest to the Marine Way. So because they sunk the buildings, initially the way it worked is that parking came in the same area, the access to the parking came in the same area. It went one way for buildings 5 and 6 into that parking structure, and then it went through buildings 7, 8, 9, and 10. all through the underneath the buildings. Now the elevations have been changed so that it's the 2 are lower, so 7 and 8 are sunk, that accesses off that area. 9 and 10 now come in from Marine Way, so it actually provides a little bit better access. Those are just the parkade materials. They're designed to fit with the same design as the units in terms of color materials. This is the parking configuration. So this is on building 10. So you can see where it accesses from into building 9. And the outline there is the building above it, essentially, is the pink lines of where that sits. This is the floor plan for buildings 7 to 10. So 4 on each level. And this is the level 3. So it shows the extent of the balconies on that. All of the units are designed to be adaptable, and all of them have elevators. This is the landscape plan. This didn't come out particularly well in PowerPoint, so I've printed off what the landscape plan looks like. There's a few pages there for that. So that is essentially what we looked at in the DP. I have included in your package the detailed guidelines for all 4 of them. And so the decision in front of council is, does it effectively meet the guidelines? Because it unfortunately does require a political decision on it, because it meets some, it doesn't meet all. Part of that is because the site was zoned in the 80s. They had a number of constraints of what they could do on this site, given that the existing conditions already were very steeply sloped. So the recommendation in the report is that it be approved subject to the drawings as submitted. So when we do a DP, we tie it to a number of elements. We tie it to the architectural drawings, so that's a condition of their permit to ensure that it's actually developed as proposed. We tie it to the geotechnical reports. So in this particular case, there's 3 documents there guiding the development, and the geotechnical analysis and the considerations continue through the construction of this development, as with most developments, but particularly on something like this. So every time they do a building, there's a geotechnical analysis that's done for every excavation. We tie it to the landscaping plans and the requirement for the landscape bonding. That stays in place for 2 years to ensure that things are done appropriately. The tree covenant is put on that 15-meter setback area to ensure that no vegetation is removed in that area. And we make it a requirement that all of the units in this development be adaptable. And by adaptable, it means that you're building in the opportunity if you need to do things like grab bars, those kind of things. They're built in. To do the retrofits on those are always very expensive. It costs next to nothing to do it when they're at the time of construction. So it's something we usually advise on all our applications for multi. So the motions in front of you are either to approve as presented. Council also has the ability to defer consideration if you need more time to consider what's in front of you or to obtain more information. Council can refer it back to us with specific direction on what you would like to see changed in it. Or council may refuse the development permit if it doesn't sufficiently meet the applicable development permit area guidelines. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, to council, any questions for clarification or additional information that you need? Councillor Toth.
Thank you. OCP policy 3.7 states that portions of the site with slopes over 30% will not be included in calculation of density or development area. Calculation of the development density is based on the areas of the property, excluding land areas with original slopes greater than 30%. If we were to follow the letter of the DPA to a T, what is the density allowed on this site?
0. Because the only area that would be above the 30, you couldn't do a whole building on it. If it was to the letter, the area that isn't above the 30 is where that parking structure is coming in, and then it tends to fall off. So there are areas within it where there would be some area that would fit in it, but be very challenging to do a full building and not hit over a 30% slope.
Follow up? Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Rowe.
Just back to the parking. So if I understand it right, then 4 of the buildings would be entered and exited onto the Strata Road, and 2 of the buildings would be exited and entered from Marine Way?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Has there been a look at sort of the impact of the increased traffic on Marine Way or the Strata Road, or do we do that sort of thing?
We do, through the chair, usually at the time of zoning, because that's where we can actually ask for a lot more in terms of off-site improvements on it. This had been zoned for a multi-use before, so there are some access requirements that needed to be in place, but there wasn't requirement to do off-site upgrades.
Okay. I'll just give an opinion, speaking as just myself. I'm having trouble getting past the statement that land slopes over 30% are generally not suitable for residential development. With my vast 4 weeks of municipal government experience, I don't think I'm coming from a place where, at this point, without further information, that I can judge whether there's been a demonstrated whether or not it's been demonstrated that the proposed development would not create environmental or visual impacts, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just say now that I would like to defer for more information, further have a better look at it.
Okay. Any other questions first before we entertain a motion? Okay. Councillor Lamb.
I was wondering, how long has this developer had this property? I've got a few questions here for you.
Through the chair, I'm not sure if he bought it at toward the end of 2016 or if it was in the beginning of 20. It might have been 2 years.
Right. Okay.
Perhaps.
Okay. And so when he bought the initial. When he bought it initially, and then so he had to finish off the units were there, and so he's got the final on all those ones, and then has he been able to move forward? Like, obviously this is a phased subdivision or phased development, so has the district, have we been appropriate with timing for him to, he's finished this one, now we can start another one? You know, so that it's it's a timely development.
Through the chair, the challenge to the applicant, or that made it challenging, when he would have purchased it, it came with the approved Form P, the approved Strata development, the approved units that went with it. They chose to petition to the courts to change it, and so it's now a different development. So it's the previous one in that area that this development applies to, that phase strata development would have provided for 47 units in a different configuration with a different unit allocation and phasing to it. They chose to change it, and so that requires there's a process, and there's a legal process, and there's a petition to the courts, and it requires the signature of the approving officer on that form to make that happen. So they chose to change it. I think they had suggested that they had to do that because it expired. They don't actually expire. You can petition to just change the dates on it. So yeah, what they bought was a one configuration. They made the choice to change it into something else that required a different development permit. Because it was a very different building, that's when it required a development variance permit because of the height. There were much bigger buildings than was initially proposed in the existing.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Scott.
When under the DPA 5, and it states that you shouldn't build over or restrict over 30 degrees, is that a standard, or is that our decision?
Through the chair. So in the guideline, it says that we it's not advised that we do that. So it's not a hard and fast. We don't actually have. If we had it written as a way that under zoning you absolutely cannot, that's a different thing. So the deliberation on it is, it's challenging to do this kind of development on this kind of slope. So have they sufficiently met the guidelines given what they were working with, that it is a zoned site, but it is a very challenging site. So it becomes an on-balance kind of decision. If you did it strictly, as mentioned, you'd essentially sterilize the site. There wasn't a decision made by the district to do that. The district can do down zonings. It follows the same process as a rezoning. It has been in place for a number of decades in terms of the zoning. I think what's gotten a little more complex is that this is a very different kind of development. It's a lot of units. And it's more of a multi-unit development than what the previous one was.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm getting at is North Vancouver has a lot of steep slopes. Do they have that same DPA 5 over 30? Do that? Is it the same, like district or municipality to municipality?
Through the chair, there's a lot of municipalities that will have steep slope development permit area guidelines. They're all different. Okay. So we're guided by the legislation in terms of how to prepare them and how to do the mapping and what it applies to. But the district has a lot of discretion, or any municipality has a lot of discretion in terms of what becomes acceptable. I mean, there's lots of examples of development on very steep slope. This is bedrock. This is not an area that's subject to landslide. It's solid rock. There's lots of examples of development that does that and does it very successfully. So what we do in our guidelines is one, ensure that it can work from a geotechnical perspective, to ensure that there is a landslide assessment done to ensure that we're not creating any kind of both on-site or off-site impacts on that, and to ensure that it goes a long way in terms of minimizing the impacts. And it really depends on, a lot of it depends on site context, what it's beside, what it's impacting, adjacent uses. So that's where it gets into, it becomes in some cases a judgment call in terms of does it sufficiently meet for this area, for this community.
Okay. So based on that, you provided the geotech reports, and thank you for that. Under page 60, item 2, it talks specifically to that the visual impact sensitivity, integrating the terrain, presents no hazards to persons or property, and you marked it as no, that it doesn't comply. But I'm getting a sense that it actually does, because the geotech reports say it's fine, there's no hazard here.
I think what we're running into here is that this site was zoned R4 prior to the OCP being adopted. If this site was not zoned R4 prior to that, it currently would not be zoned R4. But because it was zoned prior to the OCP adoption, they can legally build on this. It's up to us to determine whether or not it fits within the DPA guidelines. And in this case, for number 2, if it was a site now, it would not be zoned R4. It would not be zoned for multifamily.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why it doesn't meet. So there are some inconsistencies there.
I'll find my next questions here.
Thank you. Councillor Todd. Okay.
Thank you. The 47 units that were part of the previous plan, were they already approved?
Through the chair, the Form P was, yes.
Right.
At that time, we didn't have development permit areas. So it was essentially a subdivision plan and
Okay.
the zoning.
And then the second question is, what's the excavation method that's going to be applied to this site? Are they going to be blasting, or are they doing rock hammer?
Through the chair, I'm not certain what their process would need to be. They're certainly needing to move a lot of rock. But I'm not sure how they would do that. They have a lot of options.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a quick question, Tracy. The previous development, were they built on slopes greater than 30, before RTC purchased the property?
Through the chair. Yes, they were. Let me go back to what that floor plan.
So you're talking about the current ones that are already built?
Or what was proposed on that? Yeah, let me just go back to that. Sorry, I've got a lot of slides.
While you're finding that, just a further clarification on that. When you're saying 47 units total, is that 47 additional units total, or 47 units including the ones that are already built? Additional?
I'll have to check, because I'm trying to think if it actually included phase 4, which they did in those 47. I think when I did the analysis, it was just the footprint that they were developing on, but I'd have to double check on that. So this was what was being proposed. They were so very similar in form and character to what exists in the phase 1 to 3. So the wooden structures, they were 2 to 3 story on slab on grade. So it was very much on a steep slope. And you can see that there's additional road in there. So it was very much known that it would be a development site. There would be significant cuts to do road, because the road has to meet certain percentage. You have to flatten it out. So there was definitely, no matter how this was going to proceed, there was going to be significant site alteration.
Okay, any other questions from council? Okay, so I want to look at development permit area 5, the steep slopes guideline, and look at some of these design principles, et cetera, that are in here. So number 4, for example, I did notice that with you've sent this around, you've also included in here that there's a lot of cut, a lot of blasting that's going to have to happen to actually lower these into the site. So that does not then fit the site. It alters the site to fit the project. So that doesn't match. And we're not minimizing alteration of natural grades. We're changing all of that. And they are, number 14, they are changing so that we actually have buildable site on there. And then 23, finished slopes of all cuts and fills shall not exceed 3:1. Right, so that's again partial in there. So he is cutting quite substantially on that. Okay, and I think that's those are some of the things that the residents that are currently there have issues with, as we do too. What about 28 and 29? You're saying retaining walls should respect the natural characteristics of the site, should not present a large uniform face, smaller stepped walls. Are we doing any retaining walls in here? Or are you referring to the concrete that's going to be poured in order to build the structure? That's 28 and 29.
Right. They're not doing a lot of retaining walls. The structures are retaining. Right, it's the building itself. They're not doing additional retaining walls. This is getting at some you can certainly see through the district where they have done significant retaining walls, particularly from the road, major roads. So that's what that's getting at, that the notion of you step it so you're not getting a massive concrete block wall. This is slightly different. This is actually the buildings will be their own retaining. We're not getting additional walls at the road, so it's a little bit different issue. So that one wasn't applying really in this case.
Mm-hmm. And then under road design and stormwater management, both cases they indicate that we should protect the natural drainage flows. Given this is on bedrock and we're cutting into that, that will actually impact the natural drainage flows as well.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't, it will certainly, I mean, any kind of site alteration changes the flows. In terms of when the geotechnical analysis looked at this, it's certainly not creating an erosion issue because it is solid, but any development changes the flows. It's just uncertain what they will be. There's a lot of the vegetation on that site had been removed already.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor McLean?
Okay, so looking at all of these DPA guidelines, particularly DPA 5, steep slopes, this newest version of this development meets fewer of the guidelines than the previous version. So I understand what the developer tried to do in trying to protect some of the sight lines, keep the height of the buildings low, but the trade-off was these very deep cuts into the side of the slope. Some of the buildings have 3 stories underground, and for me that's too much. So I'd be in favor of referring this back to staff. I believe that this site can be done properly, but what we're seeing here is not it. We're getting closer, and I'm seeing the developer coming up with creative solutions. The last report said that there is no way to change this to reduce the height of the buildings. A month later or 2 months later, we come back and the height of the buildings is reduced. I think we can put this back into the developer and staff and task them with reducing some of these cuts into the side of the building while sensitively integrating into the neighborhood as well. I think this site, if it was not steep slope, it is an ideal place for density. There's density around it. The District of Sechelt is investing in this area. We're building Trail Avenue. We're building Ebtide Dog Park. This is the kind of place we want people living. It's just unfortunate that it's on a giant hill. So I want to build this. I don't want it to refuse this application. I want to tweak it and continue to work so it can integrate with the slope and the neighborhood. And I think we can get there. Going specific, I see potential in buildings 5, 6, and 10. So that's to the buildings on the ends, essentially. When you get into the middle, are some extremely steep slopes, which are very challenging. Those are the ones that give me the most pause. When you look, and it's essentially a straight drop off right in the middle, particularly buildings 7 and 8. 9 is kind of borderline in my mind. And those are the ones that are challenging from the DPA 5 perspective. So I think we can keep on working this. And instead of making a sweeping statement that says all buildings should be under 10.5, I think we can work with this. I think we can raise the height of 5 and 6 and have very little impact on the views and have less impact on the hillside as well. They're sunk into the ground for almost no reason, in my opinion. I think if we give the height variance for those 2 buildings, we can have a nicer solution. So looking on a very building-specific path forward and not saying, keep the buildings at height, don't impact the slopes. Let's look at each building and work our way through it. So yeah, I'd be in favor of referring this back to staff, and we can discuss that.
Staff.
The Chair, I just wanted to clarify in terms of in the last one when it said that the height couldn't be altered, it was meaning because it couldn't be and not impact or increase the cut and fills. So they're in a catch-22 on this one in that I'm not sure they'd want to go through a variance process again. I'm not sure the community would. So they responded to that. They've been defeated twice. They've responded to that, redid it, sunk the buildings. So yes, it has an impact. There isn't a clean solution on this that they'll do a development that won't impact slope just because of the nature of the area. We have been working with this applicant for over a year. Staff have pretty much exhausted the options. So if you want to give us direction, it needs to be a little specific. So they've, it is one where they tried to respond to the visual impact. They did that. That's the trade-off of it. There were concerns around all the traffic loading from one area. They split it. So they responded to that. There aren't a lot, there is not an option with that kind of density to come in with something that's not going to have an impact on DPA 5. It's just not possible. And every element of that, without changing the density, means something gets traded off. So that's kind of where we're at with this.
So DPA 5 is the one that's giving us pause. Okay. Councillor McLean?
So I'd put it forward that we reduce density. I think we can still have these 3-4-story buildings, just not quite as many of them. The one thing that didn't change between these 2 proposals is the density. They're both 80 units. So if the height can't change, the cut can't change, the last thing to change is density. So if that's the direction that we need, it's reduced density, it's the only thing left to give.
But that's not our decision to make. Our decision is with regards to the DPAs. Mm-hmm. So DPA 5 is the one, as I said, that we need to look at. Can we go back to the motions that you gave us, the options at the beginning?
While I'm going back there, let me just state in terms of reducing density through a development permit. The only option for doing that, because this is not a rezoning, this is a development permit. The only option to reduce density is if it can be shown that there's a safety or hazard issue. associated with that density, and then it can be reduced. So the options are more limited. It has to be specific to those guidelines. That's the boundaries within which we can work. It is, it's challenging in a DP on some of those modifications. It's cleaner on the approval or the refusal. It's the in-betweens on development permits that get challenging. They have to be, the changes have to be related to one of the guidelines.
So these are pretty much our options, because it sounds like there's no appetite here to move the development forward as presented currently. We could defer consideration of the development permit application to the 19th, if you like, that we refer it back to staff to work with the applicant to make changes, or we could refuse the development permit as it does not sufficiently meet the applicable DP guidelines. Is there anyone that, any one of these motions that a councillor would like to move forward? Councillor Scott.
I prefer option 2. I'd like to defer this. I think it's created some more questions that we really need to sit back and think about and basically ask more questions on. So I prefer to defer.
Okay, and defer to a specific date? We have a council meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I don't even think 2 weeks is going to cut it for this. So it would be the one after.
Okay, so indefinite at this point, defer. And once we get our questions answered, we can bring it back, okay? Is there a seconder for that motion? No debate, okay? All those in favor? Okay, we need to do a count. Let's try this again. All those in favor? All right, we've got 5 for, opposed? 2 opposed. Would you like those recorded? Thank you. So this is deferred. Thank you very much. Staff. So moving on to item 10.3, appointments to 2019 committees and external bodies. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The report before you is for receipt and recommending that Council appoint the standing, advisory, and select committees and external bodies that are presented there. In the case of the select committees, they have been struck and the representatives at the pleasure of the mayor. And then most of the other ones require council approval or ratification. I would also note that on page 117, the Municipal Finance Authority of BC, we have the mayor as the appointee, but the MFA does require that an alternate be appointed as well. So we're also asking council at this time to indicate who they would like to see as their alternate before endorsing the list.
Okay.
Thank you.
So first of all, for the public, the chairs and alternates for these committees were actually done by us as a group. So I didn't determine these. This came from the group. So I would like to ask, is there someone who would like to be the alternate for the Municipal Finance Authority? Councillor Toth, what is it? Municipal Finance Authority is the group that manages the financing for municipalities. So when we as a municipality, for example, are looking to finance capital projects, we go to the Municipal Finance Authority. So this would be the governing body of that authority. Councillor Toth indicated he would like to put his name forward. And Councillor Rowe seconded that. Any discussion? All right, we'll have Councillor Toth as the alternate. All in favor? Okay, thanks. Sorry, thank you. Okay, so we have a complete list.
I don't see the homelessness.
Homelessness Advisory Committee. Yes. So we have a Sunshine Coast Homelessness Advisory Committee that we have a seat on, and we don't have that on here. Sorry, I missed that one. Yeah, we can add that one. And who would like to be the? That's you.
That's why I went to it.
Okay. Councillor Rowe is going to be the appointed body for the liaison to the Homelessness Advisory Committee. Any others that we've missed? Councillor Toth.
Thank you. I just want to point out that if the Seashelton District Chamber of Commerce has an alternate, the Seashelton Downtown Business Association probably should as well.
Okay. We need an alternate for the Seashelton Downtown Business Association. They're meeting, no, they're in the evening. Evening at 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock in the evening. Mondays. And we've got two who can't be on that one.
I don't mind doing it. I just feel like
Okay.
I'm hogging the meetings.
Okay. Councillor Rose indicated she would take that on. We have a seconder for that. Okay, we've got two seconders. All in favor? Thank you. All right, so I'd like to look for a motion to set up the council appointments as presented and added to, and the external bodies as approved, as discussed. Anybody like to make that motion? Kuster and McLean, all those in favor? Thank you very much. On we go. Item 10.4. So first, a motion to receive. This is the proposed 2019 Council and Committee of the Whole meeting schedule. Motion to receive. First, moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report's in front of you for the purpose of approving Council and Committee of the Whole meeting schedule for 2019. Council's procedure bylaw requires that your schedule for 2019 be set in December so that we can publicize it. So it's there before you. Basically, the schedule is setting up regular council meetings for the first and third Wednesday of every month and Committee of the Whole on alternating Wednesdays, basically keeping with the schedule we've always followed, except there's a few changes required as set out in the report. I don't know if I need to go through them or just if you have any questions, please ask.
Any questions by council? Councillor Toth.
I understand the council procedure bylaw also technically dictates when we can hold our council and closed council meetings. Are we going to be seeing an amendment soon to bring that bylaw in line with the schedule?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We, through the mayor, through the chair, we will need to bring a procedure bylaw forward once this is adopted, and we plan on doing that in January to the council meeting, either the Committee of the Whole or council meeting in January.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so we have recommendation number 2, that the 2019 Council and Committee of the Whole meeting schedule be approved as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Council reports. We started on the left last time. We're going to start on the right tonight. Councillor, no, did I start with you last time? Sorry, other end. Councillor Kuster.
Thank you. So last week, I attended the West Seashell Community Association Annual General Meeting, November 29th at the Botanical Gardens, along with Councillor Rowe and McLean. They discussed their major capital project request, and it was determined that the traffic, parking, no sidewalk at West Seashell Elementary being the priority, as it's very dangerous for the children. They also mentioned this has been a request to council since 2010. And there had need to be very careful planning to separate the pedestrians and traffic. Members also brought about their concerns about water shortage and new development, and they had a lengthy list for operational work, which included beach trail signage, potholes, Bly and Kensington, ditch and road work, safe walkways at Burtnick Park, water bags, street lights, and one major concern was grow up in some residential neighborhoods. Nominations for 3 new members were done that night, and Martin Wilson stepped down. He's no longer chair. And Tracy did a presentation on our ICSP, and that was kind of the West Sea Schelt. And then on December 1st, I had the pleasure of judging the floats for the Parade of Lights with Councillors McLean and Rowe. And then we walked with the district truck and handed out candy canes along with Mayor Seegers and Councillor Toth. That's it for my report.
Councillor Lamb.
Was it December 5th? Okay, it's December 1st. It doesn't matter. We went to, Councillor Toth and I attended the Royal Canadian Marine Search and Rescue Station 12 award night. There was 3 members given awards for rescuing 3 people out of the water in Porpoise Bay in September of 2017. So with the Marine Search and Rescue, when they get called out, it's called a tasking. And so one of the things that they mentioned that their taskings for 2017 were down substantially. So that's nice to see. People are taking more precautions on the water. November 29th and 30th, I attended the SCRD where we started we've been introduced to the budget that's underway. Just kind of a big thanks to the people that, well, number one, the people that participated in the parade on the weekend on December 1st. That was a very good. It was a very good parade. It was very well attended. We actually had people that we met from Calgary, and they had, they were in Gibson's, but they came up for the parade because they heard about it and they were very impressed. So number one, thank you to the people that participated in the parade, and number 2, thanks to Perry and all the other members of the District of Sechelt staff that were there. And it was a volunteer, they were there as volunteers, so it was very good to see the staff given back. So thank you.
Councillor McLean.
Okay, so I attended 10 community events in the past couple weeks, so I'm not going to go through them all. But overall, I think volunteerism was the theme. So just going to use this time to do a shout out to all the volunteers in our community. Amazing thing happens because we have so many volunteers. 2 I want to touch on. One is the Voice closing/relaunch. So the new version of Voice is essentially going to encourage young people on the coast to come up with economic development ideas. So I think this is a really neat pairing in that young people have ideas, and Scredo is going to enable them to come up with economic development projects for Scredo. Scredo will vet them, and if they meet the Scredo criteria, we have new projects. So great way to generate new ideas. There's also some discussions with young people on the coast, and I tried to pick up a couple themes. So one was a trade school on the Sunshine Coast. Another was the importance of bus service, and there seems to be a lot of excitement for ride-hailing. The last one was lots of support for higher density homes. So do with those as you like, but something to keep in mind. I think that's what young people had to say at that event. I also attended an event about the Sunshine Coast Advantage, which is a new program that Scredo will be launching next month. So I'm not going to go into it too much in detail because I'll let them do the launch instead of me doing it. But I can say that they've hired Julie Clark, who's a former business administration instructor at VIU in Pell River. So they brought in somebody who seems to be very competent to lead this program. So I'm really looking forward to that, and we'll be hearing from them soon with the details.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, as well as all the good fun stuff with the parade and the Voice relaunch. We've spent this Monday and Tuesday in Councillor Boot Camp with the district staff, and I just want to formally have it recorded. My gratitude to all the staff, and I think the thing that I came away with the most by the end of Tuesday was how much everybody seems to really love their job. So they're either a bunch of really good actors or we have some really good leadership going on at the district. So yay, you guys. On behalf of Mayor Seegers as acting mayor, I attended the event for the official launch of the Protocol for Organizing Against Racism and Hate, which is a project that April Struthers has been working on in concert with many groups on the coast. And basically, I'm just going to read a little bit so everyone gets the gist of the work that's going to be ongoing. So it's to have in place a protocol for critical incident response. So the critical incident response protocol directly states the Sunshine Coast's desire to maintain a community of acceptance and understanding that welcomes and affirms our diversity of culture, religious belief, ethnic background, differential ability, age, particularly youth and elders, age groups, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. And they do that through the 3 pillars of action, which are awareness, prevention, and response. So this is going to be work that's ongoing. There are 32 communities in BC that have a program. This was a project that was funded through Embrace BC. I understand the district staff has been very helpful in bringing this to reality. So I signed it on behalf of the District of Sechelt the other day, along with Nicholas Simons and a host of other community groups. That's about it, because I'm at the wrong end of the table, but I just want to give a shout out. I've been doing a little bit of support work with my old job as president of Sunshine Coast Minor Hockey, and last year we hosted 30 youth from China that was part of the Beijing 2022 project that John Furlong is involved with, that is helping to prepare Beijing for the 2022 Winter Olympics. So we hosted a group last year for a tournament, which was a very big deal. The rules, the hoops we had to jump through for Hockey Canada to make it happen. And on December 15th, they're returning the favor, and we have 20 youth and assorted parents that will be traveling to Beijing, China, for a 5-day tournament on an outdoor rink built between the 2 Olympic facilities that they're working on for the Beijing Olympics. So they're out in the community. They're so fired up, as you can imagine, a group of 12-year-olds are. So, if you see them, buy a hot dog and just know that they're out there doing good work, and they're going to be great ambassadors for Team Sunshine Coast. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you very much. Sounds exciting. Councillor Scott.
I wasn't quite as busy on the council stuff over the last 2 weeks, but while everybody was doing the Parade of Lights, I was attending the Seaforth Highlanders Artona dinner, which is their annual mess dinner. Our MLA and Nick Simons was there. So the Army Cadet Corps in Sechelt is Corps. They've got about a strength of 12 now. Great group of people, great support people. They're celebrating their 40th anniversary for 2019. They're looking forward to their Freedom of the City Parade, January 12th. So we need to plan to attend that. On a side note, the Air Cadet Squadron on the coast is celebrating 20 years this year as well. So great youth programs. I'm proud to be part of that group. And I was much warmer than you guys, I think.
Councillor Toth.
Thank you. As Councillor Lamb said, I attended the RCM SAR recognition ceremony for their 3 members that were involved in that water rescue. And I remember the night of that rescue with the helicopter flying overhead with all the spotlights. I appreciate the work that they do in keeping people safe on the water in our community. On Friday, I vice-chaired an SCRD Corporate Services Committee because Mayor Seegers was out of town. Which between myself and Director Ties was an interesting exercise in the differences between the way the SCRD and the District of Sechelt sort of run their meetings. I handed out candy during the Parade of Lights from the District of Sechelt float. It was a good turnout, and that event gets bigger and bigger every year, despite the cold. I was at a volunteer recognition event, and the Community Resource Center had a couple of interesting programs that they shared with us that night. And I won't share all their surprises and all their news, but one of the things that they will be launching in January is a program to encourage more volunteers in our community and also sharing of knowledge. So people volunteering who might be accountants or have specialized skills that might otherwise be not found in our volunteer corps. Other than that, spent the last 2 days in orientation, as was mentioned. I appreciate the emails that I'm getting from the public, and I appreciate hearing from people who want to talk about their hopes and dreams for Sechelt. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I attended my first harm reduction community action team meeting. They call it CAT, C-A-T, Community Action Team. The group's focus is to save the lives of those who use drugs. There have been 3 deaths on the Sunshine Coast over the last 3 months. And in drug testing here on the coast, fentanyl has been found in some of the cocaine, heroin, and methadone. So information to the greater community is one of the focuses of the grant funding that this group received. So you'll be getting more information. We have been hearing from the community that they want to know what the situation here is here on the coast. Another event I attended was the Hospice Society evening. They invited 25 people from various organizations to talk about next steps for hospice. So currently there are 2 hospice beds on the Sunshine Coast. They were set up in Shorncliffe in 2004, and those are not sufficient. Given that Trellis has not moved forward, and there would potentially be other beds there, but there are other issues around that, they want to address the current need and plan for the future. So a small focus group came out of that, and they're going to put together a draft plan and bring it back to the larger group in February to see how we can move additional beds for current needs and future needs forward. The Sunshine Coast Division of Family Practice, which is the group of doctors on the coast, they held a session to inform their strategic planning. They indicated that they potentially have 3 new doctors moving to the community. But not only is housing an issue for those families that are coming, but so is the workload here. In years past, many doctors worked 70 to 80 hours a week. Well, they tell us to look at our quality of life. Well, they're starting to say, well, we need to look at ours too. So that is one of the factors that has doctors leave after their initial 2-year stint here. So they're looking at how they can address that. As mentioned, when Councillor Toth co-chaired that meeting or vice-chaired the meeting, I was attending the ICE-T meeting in Courtenay. So that's Island and Coastal Economic Trust. So that group holds 4 meetings a year. They've been given funds from the provincial government. They were given 50 million initially, yes. They spent that, and now we're given another 10 million. They have 9 million left. Those funds can be doled out to our region for qualified projects that focus on economic development in some form or another. So they have changed some of the criteria for some of those grants that are available. So we'll, as a a council and as a staff will review the criteria for the various categories and see if we can access some of those funds for local programs that we're looking at putting forward. So that's my council report, and I'll do the SCRD report. I wrote up some stuff. We did, as Councillor Lamb indicated, we did pre-budget meetings. So those meetings laid out projects that will be carried forward to 2019. So the SCRD process for the budget includes mandatory or safety items. And what they do is they cost those out and they include them in the base budget so that when we start looking at round one budget, those are actually already in there. But we went through those on the 29th last week. Also, documentation was received from community groups who are funded by the SCRD. So our Seashell Library documentation, for example, was provided. Some of the others were Sunshine Coast Tourism, Coast Cultural Alliance, Gibson's Library, etc. Gibson's Chamber of Commerce was also brought up there. And then they indicated that there were some items that they don't have information on, but they wanted to give everybody a heads up that these would significantly, potentially impact the budget in 2019. So the list is curbside organics and recycling. So they will be bringing a report forward to round one budget, actually prior to round one budget. Water projects, as we know, those are out right now and we're going to get some reports back. So we'll be looking at costing of those, and those could impact budget. Utility rate reviews, water, wastewater, curbside collection rates will be targeted for January. Protective services budget. There is a service review in process right now, particularly looking at fire halls, but also looking at emergency preparedness. And there may be budget items coming forward from that. The Transit Annual Operating Agreement. So each year, the BC Transit comes forward with the proposed items, and the preliminary information will come to round one budget. If it's approved there, that could then also impact the budget figures. Round one budget meetings are scheduled for January 21st through 23rd, and then round two budget is scheduled for March 4th through 5th. So that's my report. So let's move on to council correspondence. First of all, a motion to receive. Moved and seconded. All in favor? And are there any items here that we'd like staff to do any follow-up with? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, item 1, the letter from the community forest.
Yes.
Can we set up that orientation with the community forest?
So could we make a motion then to request staff contact them to set up an orientation workshop?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Second? All in favor? Thank you. Any of the others? I'd like to point to number 2. This has come forward fairly early for us. So, and this is more for information for councillors. We belong to AVICC, that's Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, which is a subset of the Union of BC Municipalities, which is all of the associations in BC. So typically, if we want the Union of BC Municipalities to take something forward to the government, we will have a recommendation that goes to UBCM and gets voted on by the members in attendance. Prior to that, what they request is that we actually take it to our local association and have them debate it to see whether or not we can get our local association to support whatever it is we're bringing forward. So the deadline for these are February 7th. So we don't have to have anything together now, but over the next little while, you'll probably want to go to UBCM, the UBCM website, the AVICC website, and see what kind of recommendations are there, and see if there are others that we want to bring forward. We would probably need to bring them forward sometime in early January to staff so that they could actually craft it, because it has to be put together in a certain form, certain format, and then go forward. So read this through, and if you have anything, you can talk to staff. We can talk among council, but we could bring things forward. I think we've actually already indicated one to our CAO to bring forward. Okay. Any questions about any of that at this point? All right. Next on our agenda is the RCMP Stats. Recently, I met with the CAO and the Chief Financial Officer with our new Staff Sergeant, Poppy Hallam, and she indicated that they're actually doing some work on this document to bring a little more clarity to it. For example, when we look at it, we say other criminal code or CDSA, we may not know necessarily what that means. They're going to look at adjusting these to make them a little easier for us to understand, and particularly for the community as well. So a motion to receive the RCMP monthly stats. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Any emergency items? No. I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Questions from the public and from the press? Pam.